Welcome to Plugged In, Exploring Energy, a podcast miniseries with Constellation, where we explore the evolving landscape of energy solutions. I'm your host, Chuck Hanna, Vice President of National Accounts and Solutions at Constellation. In each episode, we bring industry leaders and experts to discuss the latest innovations, challenges, and opportunities in the energy sector. We are excited to bring this podcast to you and want you to say hello to Ben Arnett, who's the Senior Director of Markets and Policy from the Nuclear Energy Institute, better known as NEI. Ben, thanks for joining. We appreciate you being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chuck.
How does it feel to be our first guest?
Yeah, I'm honored. It's really great to be a part of this, and I hope I'm one of many great guests you'll have on this podcast over the coming months and years.
Well, again, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate it. We look forward to your insights in our discussions today. In today's episode, we're going to cover the various challenges and opportunities in the energy landscape, focusing on new technologies specifically around small modular nuclear reactors, or SMRs. So I'm going to run through a couple questions with you for our dialogue today. Let me start with, a lot has changed over the past decade, not just for the energy market, but for nuclear energy specifically. We're seeing companies and utilities alike looking at new nuclear technologies for reasons including decarbonization and grid reliability. Ben, could you share from your perspective what has changed and what is driving this change?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think the first piece that's so important to realize about what's changed in the energy landscape and also the nuclear landscape over the past decade is I think we've finally gotten the recognition of nuclear's role in a decarbonized system. And so, if you and I had been having this conversation, back in 2014 or even a few years before then, I think there was still this kind of debate among proponents of decarbonization about the role that nuclear would play, both existing nuclear and new nuclear. And as we've kind of walked down this pathway, we've examined a lot of other technologies, we've really started to get into the nitty-gritty of what it's going to take to decarbonize in the United States and also around the globe. That value that nuclear brings to the system has become so clear. And so its value as a carbon-free resource, but also its value as a baseload resource to help with the reliability needs of the grid. And so those changes have really drawn a lot of attention from governments, both state, local, federal, international. We're seeing corporations start to recognize the value of nuclear. And we're also seeing a lot of environmental groups start to adopt nuclear into their platforms for a decarbonized future.
That's very interesting. It's amazing how quickly the market has evolved and how critical of a role nuclear will continue to play in terms of the electric power systems as we go forward. So thanks for setting the landscape and maybe looking ahead. Last year, grid planners nearly doubled the 5-year load growth forecast. And the DOE has also suggested in the last DOE liftoff report that the U.S. will need approximately between 550 and 770 gigawatts of additional clean, firm capacity to reach net zero. We now know this is the new normal, and electricity demand is expected to skyrocket. Ben, can you talk about why we are seeing such a surge and how well prepared the grid is to handle this?
Yeah, it's a really great point, Chuck. And, I think it builds on your previous question, which is kind of what's changed. And I think, another thing, if we were having this conversation several years ago, we would be talking about a world of flat demand growth. And that for several decades was what we saw. As the United States made gains in productivity, we also had gains in population, we had gains in economic activity that was going on. You would expect a lot of that to come with increased energy consumption. And what we've actually seen is that things like energy efficiency and other technologies have helped really curb that growth. And so we saw a really flat demand growth for a long time. But recently, as we start to think about our decarbonization pathways, we think about electrifying a lot of different sectors that previously were not loads on the grid. And so when I think about electric vehicles, for example, we have this wonderful push to increase the penetration of electric vehicles in the market. That's taking power that was previously serviced by gasoline or diesel in internal combustion engines, and it's moving it on to the grid. grid. Similarly, we look at industrial activities. A lot of industrial activities that use a lot of process heat, they traditionally have gotten that heat from coal or natural gas. As they're looking to decarbonize those activities, they're looking at electrification as a major component of that. Nuclear actually can also provide direct process heat. Some of our advanced reactor designs are really well suited for that. But really, when we think about it from a load growth perspective, a lot of that electrification is going to drive load growth. And then the one piece that I don't think that we can have an energy conversation without touching on anymore is the role of data centers. And so, I'm sure everyone listening has heard of ChatGPT and this great, AI movement, machine learning, the incorporation of all of this artificial intelligence learning into our day-to-day lives. And that consumes a lot of power. And so these data centers have been attributed with a lot of load growth on many of these grids as well. They're not the only contributor, but they are a large contributor to this load growth. That's a trend we don't see slowing down anytime soon. And so we're starting to see a lot of these industrial customers, large tech companies start to look towards nuclear energy as how they can provide not only carbon-free power, but all of this additional power that's going to be needed in the future.
Very exciting. So when we're thinking about how we actually meet this future demand that you described is driven in part by AI, data centers, electrification, how do SMRs or small modular reactors and other carbon-free nuclear technologies come into play in terms of meeting this increased expected growth in demand? Can you share your insights?
Yeah. So, we'd love to kind of break it down. I think we should think about nuclear technologies in two kinds of stages. I think one is the size, and then two are the attributes that those reactors come with, because there's a few differences when we start thinking about advanced reactor designs. So first off, thinking about size. Traditionally, our nuclear fleet were large, gigawatt scale reactors capable of producing massive amounts of electricity to power our cities and our industrial activities. Increasingly, we've found that there is a lot of smaller loads that are more remotely located, and those are better served by microgrids or by off-grid applications. And so we've started to see a really big growth in the demand for microreactors for these types of applications. So the idea of having a 1 to 10 or 20 megawatt reactor that we can place in a remote community or at the site of a remote industrial activity to power that. And so we think about that as replacing things like diesel generators. So that's been a really exciting development. We're seeing both commercial applications for that, and we're also seeing the Department of Defense move forward with those designs for their applications. We get to those small modular reactor size. So that's nuclear reactors up to about 300 megawatts. Those are really well suited for replacing existing fossil generation. We've seen a lot of great proposals to replace retiring coal plants with SMRs. They're of similar size to the boilers that would be being replaced and allow the owner of those assets to deploy them in a more phased approach. So maybe if you don't need a gigawatt worth of power all at once, you can do this in phases. And we've also been able to adopt a lot of technology into those SMR designs to help drive down costs at the manufacturing scale. Then we think about the large reactors, and I think one of the trends we've seen in the large, gigawatt scale reactors is internationally, those are still very much so in high demand. We haven't had a lot of building of those in the United States in a while. We did just complete Vogtle 3 and 4, which has been fantastic. And, the state of Georgia is really happy to have those online. But with this change in demand for electricity, we're seeing a lot of folks start to relook at those gigawatt scale reactors and say, hey, maybe we actually do need this kind of size of reactor to service this new load. I mentioned slight technology difference as well. And so when we get to some of the advanced reactor designs, whether those are micro, SMRs, or large, several of those designs are capable of some slightly different features. So I'll point out TerraPower has a reactor that they're constructing in Kimmerer, Wyoming. That is a liquid sodium reactor. And they've actually coupled that with a molten salt battery. And so what this feature allows is for that reactor to load follow. So it's a really great complement to intermittent renewables to provide carbon-free reliability to the grid. We look at another project that's moving forward in Seadrift, Texas, which is a partnership between X-Energy and Dow. In that partnership, that X-Energy reactor is a high-temperature gas reactor, which enables it to produce really high temperatures. And so Dow is looking at using that heat off of the reactor to decarbonize their facility that currently uses process heat. And that's a really great prospect, because instead of having to take heat off of a reactor and convert it to electricity and then convert it back to heat, and you have all of those associated losses, you're actually able just to use that heat directly. And so a lot of really encouraging applications. I would say that just about any application that needs to be decarbonized, we have a member who's looking at using a nuclear technology to fit that need. So really exciting time.
That's a great overview, and I think gives tremendous insights around the different technologies and sizes in terms of what's available and maybe commercialized over the future, and really paints an exciting outlook in terms of how we may apply these technologies to our various customers across the U.S. So let's talk about this continued load growth that you mentioned is driven in part by data centers and AI. So a lot of these companies, some examples, but just to name a few, including Microsoft, AWS, and Google, are looking to develop clean nuclear to power their operations. In fact, recently, Constellation made an announcement around the restart of a nuclear unit to be named the Crane Energy Center as one example of that. Can you talk about why these companies are looking at SMRs and how we see the business model evolving in this area?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. This is really one of the more exciting developments that we've seen over the last couple of years. And before I go into kind of great pairing of that, I do want to congratulate Constellation on the restart of 3 Mile Island 1 and the creation of the Crane Energy Center. That is a wonderful partnership, and one that we're really excited to see move forward, and excited to see how these kinds of deals evolve over the years too, because I think we're going to continue to see this wonderful partnership between these tech companies and owners and operators of nuclear facilities. So thinking about the kind of load that these data centers are, first we have to kind of think about the use case. And so there's a number of different kinds of data centers. Some data centers are able to be turned off and on more easily, ramped up and down, and so therefore they can rely on less reliable power. If they have a reliability challenge, they can power down the operation and shift that load to another facility elsewhere. But what we're continuing to see with this development of AI is that these data centers are not as flexible. They're not as willing or as able to be ramped up and down. They really want to operate 24/7, 365. And so we call that 5 nines reliability. They need to be on 99.999% of the time, which is a really firm load. And so when we think about servicing that, the downtime cost for these facilities is dramatic. And so they have a willingness to pay for reliable power. They also want that power to be clean. And so one of the things I think we're seeing develop here is almost kind of a microcosm of the grid, right? It's these demanders that want clean power and are realizing that it's really hard to get that on a 24/7 basis. And so similar to our challenges with decarbonizing the grid at large, maintaining that reliability is always a challenge when you think about bringing on a lot of intermittent sources like wind or solar. And we're going to need a lot of those sources as well. But when we think about firming that up and creating that reliability, you really need something like baseload nuclear that's dispatchable and able to service that load as it comes. And so these tech companies have looked at a lot of different technologies and really found that nuclear, both on grid or potentially behind the meter, can be really helpful in servicing their demand needs. And I think we're going to see the rest of the grid kind of wake up to this as well. I think for a long time, when we've done energy modeling in the United States, we've kind of assumed reliability. We assume that some technology will come along and fix this reliability challenge for us, whether that be long duration storage or something like carbon capture sequestration. We haven't seen those technologies advance as fast as we're going to need to meet our climate goals. And so I think finally there's been this realization that we need to go with the only carbon-free technology that we've ever scaled at this kind of level, which is nuclear. And so I think we're seeing that from the tech companies. I think we'll see that much larger at the grid scale as well.
Interesting. So that gives us good insights in terms of the larger consumers and the types of technologies within nuclear they consider. How about on the other end regarding micro reactors? We're seeing other industries like oil and gas looking to decarbonize their operations using smaller micro reactors. Where do they fit into these new business landscape for clean nuclear technologies? Can you share your insights here, Benton, please?
This has been a really cool development. So I always kind of, chuckle when I think about microreactors and, this kind of newness that they have to them, because we've had microreactors in this country for a long time. We use microreactors on our submarines. We, use them on our aircraft carriers. And so we've safely operated, these small microreactors and small modular reactors in this country for a long time. What we're starting to see is different use cases for them, and particularly civilian use cases. So you mentioned the oil and gas example, and this has been a really great partnership that's come about over the last year or so. So a company, NOV, recently spun off Shepherd Power, which is a company that's looking at supplying the oil and gas industry with a microreactor design. And, what they're really looking at are these large loads that are remotely located. So thinking about like the Permian Basin, you're, away from a lot of large population centers, but you have a lot of a load needed to power all this oil and gas infrastructure. And so if you can go in and replace diesel generation on site with microreactors, you not only can decarbonize that facility, but you can potentially save a lot of money. I mean, when you think about all of the effort that goes into shipping that fuel all around the country to service these remote needs, there's a lot of cost and a lot of effort that goes into that. And so that's been a really great application. They're also looking at the potential of using these types of reactors for process heat as well. So there are a number of heat applications that you need in a remote facility, whether that be defrosting equipment or also just using actual process heat for a chemical facility. And so this partnership with the oil and gas industry is fairly new, but I'm really excited about it. I'm excited about the project management skills that they're going to bring to the industry, the ability to manage these large, very complicated supply chains. It's something that they've done well for a long time. And I think that the nuclear industry has a lot to learn. And so I'm looking forward to that adoption. I also mentioned the Department of Defense. They are continuing to expand their use of microreactors and looking at using those for forward operating bases, similar to the Shepherd Power case that I outlined earlier. Having to ship a lot of diesel to and from your forward operating bases is not only costly, but it's a weak part in your supply chain. And so you can actually get a lot more operational readiness by having this firm, reliable power available through microreactors.
Yeah, very interesting. So my takeaways from your insights that you've shared with us are, this combination of evolving technologies around carbon-free nuclear technologies. Key part of that is the operational capability, expertise that'll be included with that, as we've come to see throughout the nuclear industry. And then a huge opportunity for how we may commercialize different solutions for customers from the very largest to other industry segments across the marketplace, both in terms of commercial, industrial, and government applications. So it really paints an exciting future in terms of what's to come, so to speak. So let's shift over here a little bit. Given this new demand and the surging energy needs beyond the electric grid, where do we go from here regarding what policies and regulatory action does the industry need to see to meet this demand?
It's a question that we've been asking a lot at NEI and talking with our allies on Capitol Hill and around the country to kind of try and figure out what we can do to really jumpstart this nuclear industry. And I think the first place I would start is, really looking at these early of a kind costs. And so when we think about deploying new nuclear, there are a lot of learnings that are going to come from that. There are a lot of supply chains that we still need to build up. And it's really unfair to put all of that cost on, the first customer. And so we've been thinking about what are the roles that the federal government can play, or the state governments, to help alleviate some of those costs for these early movers while capturing those benefits for the United States. And one area we've really found that's been interesting is the national security points for developing these technologies domestically. So when we think about our allies abroad, we think about the large amounts of power demand that are happening outside of the United States. Many countries are looking at using nuclear energy, and they'd like to partner with the United States and use a US-based design. Their challenge is that they'd like to use a design that we've built here domestically already. And so I think is having some of those public dollars come in to help alleviate this early mover challenge is going to actually have a lot of follow-on effects and a lot of benefits to the U.S. in international diplomacy. So those are some of the dynamics we've been discussing with policymakers for new reactors. I'd also add that one of our greatest assets in combating climate change and meeting our decarbonization goals by 2050 is making sure that we can maintain and get the most out of our existing fleet. And so when I think about the existing fleet, it's about a fifth of our current electricity supply. It's our largest supplier of carbon-free power, producing just under about 50% of our total carbon-free power in the United States. And so those reactors are going to need to continue to be have their license extended. They're going to need to continue to operate, or else we're going to have to make up for gigawatts worth of power coming off of carbon-free power coming off of the grid, which is very, very challenging. So we're kind of taking, two steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back if we don't maintain this existing fleet. And so a couple policy tools that are already in place for that we think need to continue. The Inflation Reduction Act included the 45U production tax credit for the existing fleet. That tax credit provides a floor price for electricity. It provides $15 per megawatt hours, but it's variable based on the electricity prices. And what we've seen is this has really created a lot of incentives for owners of nuclear plants to keep those plants online. They're no longer struggling with negative prices overnight, or at least the impact from those negative prices overnight is not as dramatic. And they're also able to now have the capital to make the necessary investments to keep these facilities online. So we think, that production tax credit is something that we want to see continued and make sure that it's available for this fleet. Now, we also had the Civil Nuclear Credit Facility, which was part of the infrastructure bill. And that program was used to help extend the life of Diablo Canyon in California. And we've seen some other nuclear projects look to that facility for some support as well. And so really, those are 2 key federal programs that I think are going to be necessary going forward. And we want to make sure that those are available when we need them.
Thank you. And I wanted to thank you and all of the work that NEI is doing to continue to decarbonize and provide carbon-free energy for the energy marketplace. So that's it for our discussions for today. Benton, again, I want to thank you for joining us. Really appreciate your insights, taking the time to spend with us on these topics. And until next time, I'm Chuck Hanna, and this is Plugged In, Exploring Energy, a podcast miniseries with Constellation.
This is Deborah Channel from Smart Energy Decisions. We're really thrilled to have Constellation as part of Smart Energy Voices. I want to thank Chuck Hanna and the team from Constellation for making this miniseries possible. And as always, thank you to our listeners for being part of the Smart Energy Decisions community. If you enjoyed the episode, you can subscribe to the podcast on your preferred platform, and don't forget to tell your colleagues and peers about it too. To learn about how you can become part of our online and in-person content, visit our website at smartenergydecisions.com. We're always excited to share these presentations from leaders of the energy transition. We do that in this podcast, on our website, and at our events, and it's all in the interest of helping you make those smart energy decisions.